On today's show of YOUnique TV, Faith at Work, we'll explore the value of living an exhilarating life full of zest and zeal. My next guests are doing just that, and they're doing it single. They're not alone, just not married. And they found out the single most important thing to living a happy, rich life. Have you? Whatever your season of life that you're in, married, single, widowed, with kids, without kids, you're gonna wanna know their secret to living the ultimate, fulfilling life.
I'm Wendy Lynn, an entrepreneur, speaker and author, image and beauty expert, wife and chic mom, lover of my Lord, life, family, and all things fun. I wanted to create a program that featured unique people with unique lives and share their unique stories. This is YOUnique TV.
Brimming with energy, a very quick wit, and a passion for living the authentic life, Dominic Catalano brings excitement, humor, and purpose to Catholic evangelism. A Central Florida native, Dominic graduated from the United States Coast Guard Academy in 1990 and traveled the world for over 7 years before returning home. Since 1997, he has ministered to all ages, especially youth and young adults, through youth ministry, confirmation, high school retreats, and speaking engagements throughout the country. Let's get to know Dominic a little better now. Well, so you were in the Coast Guard.
Right.
And then where all have you been? What have you seen? What have you done exciting?
Well, when I went to the Coast Guard Academy, I had two pretty good adventures. One of them was we sailed on the Eagle, which is a tall ship, and we left Connecticut in September, and we got to Australia 4 months later. So we were there for their bicentennial. So that was a great 4 months across the Pacific. And then I spent a summer in between my junior and senior year on a patrol boat in Ketchikan, Alaska. So I got to spend some time in there. And then my first assignment was on a buoy tender out of Galveston, Texas. I was there for 2 years. And then I went to a year in Italy on a small island, Lampedusa, which is famous in the news now for immigration. It's near Libya. Okay. And so I was there for over a year. Wow. Catalano, local boy, makes good, returns home, ate a lot of pasta. It was a good time. And then I was a teacher in the Coast Guard for 3 years. I lived out in wine country, North Bay, for 3 years. And then I was 1 year in Guam, and that was a great experience too. And then from there, I came back home and got involved in youth ministry. So Coast Guard was good. It was it's a life-saving, it's peacetime. It was really something up my alley more than any of the other services. So it was great. Yeah.
Good. Well, certainly sounds like a full, rich life already.
Your tax dollars are well spent, I can assure you. So yeah, it was good. I made sure of that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for serving.
Don't mention it, sure.
No, we want to mention it, and we should mention it. But in addition to the experiences, and in addition to serving, and in addition to striving and finding your purpose, you know, so many people don't ever get there, do they? They don't, they just kind of wander. Maybe they have some good experiences, but they don't do it with gusto because they really never get the purpose part figured out.
I think, you know, we all look for that purpose, and we're all looking for that purpose. However, God has a plan for each one of us, and I think if we stop and realize what's God calling me to do today, and where am I supposed to bloom today, we think about tomorrow and we project out 5 and 10 years, and that's great, but what's God calling us to do right now? And I lost sight of that. Certainly when I was younger, I was immature. I didn't know. I'm just rolling along. This is how it happens. You get a degree, you get a wife, you get a job, and if it doesn't play out that way, then you're considered different, and something's not the same as everybody else. And so I realized several years into my 30s that I had to bloom where I was planted, and God had a plan for me, and maybe it was different than everybody else's, but that was my role for what God wanted in my life. So, and everyone has to realize that.
It was your unique story. I mean, really, uniquely for you to fit, to be away. I of course, love that saying, bloom where you're planted.
Yeah.
And not only bloom where you're planted, but bloom to be what you were planted to be. That's another thing. It's not only where, but it's what and who you were planted to become.
There's an author, Matthew Kelly, talks about being the best version of yourself.
Right.
And being the best version of yourself today. And we're all made in the image and likeness of God. And so how can we fulfill that right now? Not tomorrow or 10 years from now or 20, because we were talking before, when this happens, then I'm gonna arrive, or when I get that money or drive that car or wear that shirt or do whatever, then I'm gonna arrive. And that day will never come if we keep projecting out. Where does God want us today?
Waiting for the next thing, the next thing.
Yeah.
And that doesn't matter whether you are single, married, with kids, without kids. Kids are gone, kids come back. And whether
grandkids come,
widowed, whether whatever, we do tend to have that mentality that if this, then this. And really God does want us to celebrate and bloom and embrace.
Right, He's got a plan right now. So it's not tomorrow, it's to fulfill that. I think it's important.
Well, now, is it possible that some women might not be able to keep up with you? And is that the reason that there may not be someone else in your life?
And that's a good question, because you said earlier, how come you're single, or how come people ask that? And maybe that is. And I think when I was younger, I bet I used that as an excuse. I was immature in my 20s. If I'd gotten married in my 20s, I would have been a statistic because I thought I had it together. But I realized later I would have been a miserable spouse because I didn't really know who I was or really where I was going, and it would have been a bad experiment. And so I think that I use busyness in life, and I think other people do too, but specifically, I know I've used busyness in life to maybe not be involved in a relationship. When I was younger, it had to do with maybe feeling like I wasn't worthwhile, or I felt like I was inadequate, whatever, that immaturity. And so we project a sense of busyness or a sense of maybe I have it all together, when in reality we don't. So we use busyness sometimes to deflect being what God wants us to do. And so I think realizing that was very important. I do think I have a full and rich life, Wendy, but I've got to be careful about balancing it, between having a personal and just being open and really available to that.
Well, and you are open.
I feel that I am.
You're open.
I feel called to that.
It's a full, rich life the way it is, and yet you're open to whatever the best is that God has for you in the seasons to come.
I feel that. And we talked with marriage or not marriage or single, but it's a vocation. It comes from the word vocal. It's a call from God, and to really be open to that. And that means we have to be quiet. We have to listen to what God's trying to speak to us and tell us. And there's that joke about the guy during the flood, and he climbs on the roof, and there was a boat that comes by, and then a helicopter, and then he dies and goes to heaven. And St. Peter meets him at the gates, and he asks St. Peter, "Hey man, I was relying on God the whole time." And St. Peter's like, "Dude, we sent you a boat and a helicopter." And sometimes if we take time to realize the messages that God's sending to us, we realize our vocation, that call from God.
If there were some awesome women out there.
And there are great women.
And there are great women. Yeah. Well, so tell us, do you have any, what's the deal breaker for you? Do you have a deal breaker?
Well, the things that I guess most important for me is my family. And if someone can't amalgamate into my family, and her family would be very important as well. If you don't have family, for me, that's just very important. And that's probably number one, along with faith. I happen to be Catholic. Does that mean I'm against any other religion? No, I'm not. My spiritual walk is like a toothbrush. Everyone should have one, but don't use mine. Don't try and jam yours down my throat. Don't expect me to do the same, but walk with me and help me be the best Catholic and best Dominic I can be. To that end, build me up and help be part of that. And those are the two things that are, to me, that I'm passionate about and that are very important to me. And if it doesn't work out, we can fist bump and move on. Okay, but those for me are kind of showstopper. What's up? So those are things that are very important to me,
right.
That I've come across.
So faith and family.
Faith and family.
Right up there.
Boom.
Yeah,
right there.
Great,
yep.
great. Well, and if you really, that's what's important to you.
Yes.
What character qualities might be important, though, in a woman? I mean, what's hot, fun, and exciting to you?
To me, well, that's a great question. I think after you talk about deal breakers, I mean, there are other things that are important, like someone said, was it drama and baggage equals draggage? I mean, you know, it's just,
drama and baggage equals
draggage.
Well, that's a new word.
And I'm not, you talk about relationships across the board.
Yeah.
You know, there are people who drain you in life, and they just like suck the energy out of you when you're around them. You're like, oh my God.
Yes.
And you're around them because sometimes you have to, but I mean, in a relationship, it should be positive and uplifting, and my blood type is B positive. It's about, you know, it's about positivity. It's about being good things. I know, surprise, but that's important for me.
Right.
Some people thrive on that.
Right.
You could have somebody else sitting right here, and they're like, "Woo, drama! What I need it. Me, not so much."
Yeah.
So, and baggage is different, I think, in the sense that some people bring things from their past forward. And it's about identifying those things and finding out what we can leave behind and who we are.
Moving through them.
We talked about some things our own families have gone through before we came on. And it's important to find out who you are and then realize what I can leave, check at the door, and maybe a little carry-on. You know what I'm saying? Maybe carry-on. You know, we don't need any big trunks and anything like that.
We don't need two suitcases
Don't
on
need two
wheels.
roll-ons.
Just one little.
We all have our stuff. So that would be something. I'm not a big drama person, and maybe Franciscan in the sense that, like the new Pope, he's Franciscan and took Pope Francis. Less is more. You know, in our society, it tells us the more you have, the better you are, the more successful. And I think there's something to be said about. Yeah, less is it's okay. Less is okay. You know, scale down.
Simple is
hot. Simple's hot.
Simple is hot.
Simple is hot.
Okay, so what does that mean? No makeup?
No, not that in the sense. No. But you know, some people, it's a materialistic society in the sense that that I've got to have more than the next person, and they lose focus about community and the wider things that are important outside themselves, and they turn inward, and it's about what they need for them as far as things, and things go better with Coke. And that's about it. We have to realize that maybe things aren't so important. Right. It's about relationships, it's about family, it's about time. Right. So.
Well, tell us, because as we wrap up here and we think about all that you've said, and some people are single, but they don't have that same outlook. You know, they really are wishing, hoping, and wanting for more. Would there be any advice you could give them? Ooh. Was there a switch in your life when you can relate to that person, and now you just feel like it's so much easier to have an open hand, open-armed approach to what in fact it is God has for you? Well, but how about the person that isn't there yet?
Well, first, I think anyone who says they have it all figured out is a liar. I'm just, it's a daily thing. Yeah. You got to get up the next morning and you got to say, some days you don't have it. I mean, let's just be honest. So you have to realize that first you don't have all the answers, and it's okay to admit that I'm struggling, and because anyone who thinks they got it all figured out, Wendy, I'm probably not gonna believe in them. Okay, but your question about, for me, probably about 10 or 12 years ago, I went through a relationship, and it opened up a lot of things about myself, realizing the journeys that I had been on, learning about your love languages, learning about Myers-Briggs, finding out your personality, what's important, what isn't important, sitting down and writing down what's important. And it comes down to those two kind of deal breakers or showstoppers. What else is important? Less is more. And actually putting pen to paper. I also started keeping a journal years ago, and I think that's a great way to start jotting down thoughts and realizing what's really important. And once I started doing that, and then I began to just tell myself, today, what does God have for me today? Yeah. What does God want from me to be the best version of myself today? That's not tomorrow, not 10 years from now. That's great, but I've got to figure it out today. And as soon as I reminded myself of that, for me, that helped me a lot.
That worked. Okay.
I don't know if it worked. I'm still working on it. Work in progress now. Work in progress.
Well, we all are. And,
okay.
You know, in closing, I think too, one of the best reflections. A lot of times people do it at a wedding, or but I love the idea when there are two candles, and the truth is that the one should burn more brightly together than they should separately. And so when that happens, then there is strength, there is honor.
Makes sense.
There is glory. And if that isn't going to happen, you might as well shine your light bright the way you are, making a difference. Really embracing life.
This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. That's a great song to think about.
It is. So. It really is. Well, you've been an awesome guest.
Thanks for having me, Wendy. I appreciate it.
Thank you for the unique way that you are living your life.
I'm
full
trying.
Out.
Thank you.
Full out for God.
Thanks, Wendy.
You are the
You're
best.
doing awesome, too. Thank you for what you're doing.
Thank you so much. Rarely are the terms hilarious storyteller and theological scholar used in the same sentence, much less used to describe the same person. But then again, Lisa Harper is anything but stereotypical. She has been lauded as a gifted communicator whose writing and speaking overflows with colorful pop cultural references. Her style combines sound scriptural exposition with easy-to-relate-to anecdotes and comedic wit. She's toured with Women of Faith for 10 years, and before that was the women's director at Focus on the Family. She's authored 10 books, and today you'll hear her authenticity as she shares about one of the most personal topics of all of her singleness. So Lisa, how many years have you been with Women of Faith?
I think this, I was trying to remember, but you know, I'm getting older, so my memory's getting foggy. I think this is my 8th year.
And can you tell us something about how you've seen it change?
You know, what has been so great about being with Women of Faith is I call it the sisterhood of the traveling Spanx. There is such a community with us being on the road together, and previous to Women of Faith, I was always on the road by myself, which I love. Anywhere I can go and tell stories where Jesus is the hero, you know, it's wonderful. But to get to do that with community, I think God serves his best stuff at the table of community. So that's been the sweetest part, is to be with girls who become like sisters.
And how do you stay culturally relevant and not too shifted by everything that's going on in the world?
That's good. When I'm not with Women of Faith, I live in Nashville, Tennessee. I always tease and say that's where people talk correctly. Although I'm from Central Florida, so I've just gotten more and more into the deep South. But I spend a lot of time volunteering with women in recovery, and that's about as relevant as it gets. Most of the girls I spend time with during the week are recovering from drug and alcohol addiction. And so you can't be superficial with them. You know, they can read false a million miles away. And I think that's one of the things that keeps me grounded and reminds me of how powerful the gospel is. There is no such thing as being too broken for Jesus.
That's right. Well, and that reminds me of your new book called Malachi.
That's right. I love, and people always are like, Malachi. And if you're Italian, you can call it Malachi. But yeah, the whole point is God doesn't ever let go. We will never see God's back as his people. Yeah, I love that book. I think it's like the Rodney Dangerfield of Scripture. It doesn't get enough respect.
Great. Well, what compelled you to write it?
Because I was really marinating in the fact that God's love doesn't leave us. I'd been through a tough season, lost my father, had a little bout with cancer, ended up not being serious. But you know those seasons in your life where you start just taking stock of what's important. I thought, you know, it is the consistency of God's affection that keeps me getting up every morning. And so I thought, what book that hasn't been done a lot as far as Bible studies go, could I focus on that theme? And Malachi is kind of what the Lord brought to mind.
Right. Well, how do you relate to God never letting go of you?
Oh, good night. I'm sometimes shocked he hasn't, because I feel like I'm just one rung below prodigal most of the time. God has been so incredibly gracious. I just turned 50 last month, so I have my first AARP card, so I can get McDonald's discounts. But a year and a half ago, I started the process of adoption, and I never thought I'd have that much in common with Abraham and Sarah. You know, I thought, Lord, I don't want to be wearing Depends when I get to buy Pampers, but the fact that I get to be a mom, the fact that God has redeemed that part of my story, it's just this consistent, amazing journey that God not only doesn't let go, but he continues to pursue us. So I feel more in love with Jesus than I ever have been.
And so you're single, right? Well, tell us, what does it really look like when you flesh out the truth of making God your husband?
I never thought I'd be this old and be single. I always wanted to be married. But I was pretty broken in my 20s and 30s. There was some abuse in my background, so I always say my picker was broken. My default setting was pretty stuck on abusive men. And so God protected me from the men I was drawn to in my 20s and 30s. The few good, really godly guys I dated, God protected them from me because I was such a stinker, and I do not think I would have been, at least I wouldn't have been faithful in my heart in my 20s and 30s, because God was just healing a lot of bruises. And then all of a sudden I was 40 and I was like, oh, good night. I didn't think, I'd have chemically dependent hair and still be single. But I feel like during this process of being an older single, what I've been learning is he really does fulfill his promises. And God says he's a husband to the husbandless and a father to the fatherless. And that's true. I'd still love to be married. So 1-800-588, please call Lisa for a date. But only if that's God's will. I don't want to marry just for the sake of being married. I love my life. Christmas can be hard, Valentine's Day is hard, but the other 363 days a year are amazing. And so if I get to be the mom of this adopted child and I kind of sort of get a baby daddy the next year or two, that'd be cool. If I don't, I don't. And God really is enough. He's my contentment.
Give us an encouraging word to all the women out there who really, really, really want to be married, and they are waiting for God's best, and Mr. Right just hasn't shown up yet. What would you say to that woman?
One of my favorite, of course, whatever verse I'm hanging out in at the time becomes my favorite. People are like, what's your favorite book? And I'm like, whatever I'm studying this week. But I love Psalm 84:11. It says, no good thing does God withhold from him whose walk is upright. And so what that verse means to me, that promise is we won't miss it. So if you think, oh, good night, I need to go ahead and grab this, or somebody else won't come along. I'm like, no, you trust in the promises of God. You trust in God's faithfulness. You run toward Jesus with all your heart. And if he's called us to be married, that will happen. Now, I'm not the greatest, example of that, being 50 and still being single, but I wasn't ready to be married in my 20s and 30s, as I said. So I think you've got to be really careful in getting ahead of the Lord. Mm-hmm. And then also I remind young women that I talk to who are single all the time, we live on a broken planet. This world is marred by sin, and so you aren't necessarily going to get everything you want here, but God says he'll give us the desires of our hearts as long as they're in accordance with his purpose. God's purpose is for us to love Jesus. And I think he realigns our will constantly so it will be congruent with his. I mean, if I woke up every morning and followed my will, I just have carbohydrates and new shoes every day. But if I'm leaning into Jesus, if I'm spending time in his word, if I'm being alone with God and going, okay, Lord, I want my will to be your will. I want my heart to be in line with yours. Then a lot of times he'll shift my heart and my mind, and I'll realize, wow, that wasn't at all what God wants for me. But sometimes I get pretty far down the path of what myself wants if I'm not with the Lord a lot. Again, that brings me back to the sisterhood of women of faith. I've got some great sisters who, when they see me getting out of line, will kind of jerk me back into alignment by saying, Lisa, you're being a stinker, or you're being selfish, or you're not focusing on the fact that God is a husband to you right now. So I think it is critical for us to be around other believers too.
And so, Lisa, tell us about Music for Missy.
Oh, thank you for mentioning. That's right. That's right. So, Monday night, we've got just a bunch of people coming to Nashville, really to kind of bring not just my little girl, but the issue of kids with HIV. My little girl has HIV. She's doing great on meds. I think I'll have her home by Christmas, but we're raising money for medical fund for her, but also for people to go, oh, wow, maybe God's called me to take a leap of faith. Maybe it's fostering, maybe it's walking across the street and chatting up a lonely neighbor. So that's what we're talking about on Monday night.
Awareness is good.
That's right.
And when
very
the
good.
community comes together and supports the cause, I know you feel so humbled. But
oh, I do. Yeah, I'm undone by it. I can't wait. I'm so excited. I can hardly stand it.
Oh, well, you're deserving, and so is she. So
oh, thank you, Wendy.
What a win-win and a blessing.
I think so. I think I'll make every mistake in the motherhood book, but I'm ready to start. That's right.
That'll be new material.
That's right. New material.
There you go. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
And all the best.
Thank you. God bless you.
Great.
She's, darling, you can't not grin when she's interviewing you because she's just grinning the whole time. My cheeks were starting to cramp. It's like, dang, Wendy, I can't stop grinning. You know how to do it. Take it away.
The single most important takeaway from today's show is to embrace your unique calling, using your gifts and talents to make an impact, to claim personal responsibility for your own happiness, and to celebrate your life right where you are today, not where you hope it might be someday. Until the next edition of YOUnique TV, I'm Wendy Lynn Phillips, shining my unique light bright in the marketplace. Put your faith to work and work it out with faith. Bye for now.